Our speaker today is Edward Clark James II, better known as Ted, State Representative, Democrat from Baton Rouge, a guy who has spent all of his 40 years here, went to South Boulevard, to McKinley Middle, McKinley High School, Senior High School, and Southern University undergraduate and law school, and in 2011, 10 years ago, he was elected to the State House of Representatives. He's the chair of the Black Caucus, and he is a major player in Louisiana politics with a lot of years to go, a lot of miles to travel, and we're glad he's here for the first time since 2018. Representative James.
Thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, everyone. I see some folks that I like seeing you guys. I don't miss you all yet. The folks that have to camp out with us at the Capitol, and some friends, some antagonizers. But friends nonetheless. So thank you all for being here today. And, you know, of course, I think the number one most important thing that is happening across our state, of course, is the continuing spread of the Delta variant of COVID-19. If any of you know my story, you know that I have a unique COVID experience as one of the early cases and one of those who found himself in the hospital early on. So I always want to urge members of our community to protect themselves, protect their families. And as a lawyer, I would not ask you to get legal advice from a plumber. So I try not to give medical advice, but I will say that the people that took care of me when I was in the hospital, they have urged me to get the vaccine. And if I trusted them to take care of me back in 2020 for those 5 days, then I will trust their guidance today. And that's my message to each and every one of you. And I think that what's ironic about it is that when I was diagnosed with COVID, I think it was the first week that the government had shut down, that the state had shut down. We retired the session on a Monday, and the next Monday I found myself with a fever. And early on, they kept telling us that it was not a disease that a young person would probably get. And right now, when you look at the rising number of cases, the cases and the folks that are in the hospital, most of those folks are my age group. And I think it's a large part of not being vaccinated. One, I think that we were so bored in 2020 that the moment things started to get back to normal, we started to gather more and get out and enjoy life. And those things are great if you're vaccinated, but if folks in my age group aren't doing their part to get vaccinated, I think we're going to steadily see more cases. And it's extremely concerning for me, as today I dropped off my little 4-year-old for her first day of pre-K, and we're hearing so many issues with our young people, and those young people that are so vulnerable and can't be vaccinated, and they're in those classrooms. So I would ask that you play your part and get vaccinated, and encourage those people in your families and in your networks to do the same. Because I know that I'm excited about Southern and LSU football. Disappointed that Jazz Fest was canceled, but I understand that those we're going to continue to see cancellations if we don't get this thing under control. So this past legislative session, and I know a lot of what I wanted to talk about is regarding the first and historic veto override session, but I think that it's important to talk about the regular session, because I think that we don't do enough to highlight a lot of the positive things that are happening here. And for you, the press club, I thank you, especially here in Baton Rouge, because in certain places I know that there are media outlets that serve more as bloggers and not to really put out the news. So I thank you, because you serve a very important role in that the folks that I represent who don't have the time to camp out at the Capitol, who are busy working 2 or 3 jobs, they rely on you to educate them on what's happening at the Capitol. So I appreciate the work that you do. And I have always been one to try to be transparent and available to the media. And I know some folks have not exercised in that fashion, but I think it's negligent of us not to, because you guys serve an important role. And if ever there's an uncomfortable conversation or an uncomfortable question, I think that I have a duty to respond, not just to you all, but I think I have a duty to respond to the people that I represent, so thank you. This past session, I believe we showed that we can actually compromise as a legislature. Our term started in that Democrats forged a partnership with some of the Republicans to elect Speaker Shake Snyder. And that coalition has worked well outside of the past month or so to advance some very important issues in the state. And there have been issues that were traditionally carried by Democrats that are now carried by my Republican colleagues and vice versa. We have not had a session where Democrats, especially in the caucus that I represent, the Black caucus, that played a major role in tax discussions. Our focus has usually been around social issues and criminal justice reform, but this year we worked extremely well with our Republican colleagues to pass tax reform. And unfortunately, we get unfairly put in the box that Democrats don't want to see tax reform. We have watched year after year as a lot of the proposals that were passed this year were authored by many of my colleagues on the Democratic side in past years. And when many of you asked for us to go and get a bipartisan group and get us advice, recommendations several years ago, we said no to those recommendations. And this year, we finally started to do what was asked of us, and we started to pass a monumental tax reform. Now, a lot of those things were upheld for a few weeks as we negotiated, and one of the things that I heard someone speaking about it earlier, and I've had opportunity to talk to Jim about this on his show. A lot of the conversations around, the former chairman of education were largely distractions for us. Those were conversations that, quite frankly, I didn't want to have, because as chairman of the Black Caucus, we had a very aggressive agenda, and that conversation, that incident caused a huge distraction in what we were trying to accomplish at the legislature. And it's not surprising that we, as Democrats, held up certain tax votes. We've done that in the past. This year, it was categorized as a response to what happened in House Education. But if you look back, every fiscal session, for those of us on my side, we don't have the numbers to really influence the debate, the agendas, when the votes are merely 53. But when there are 70 vote bills, that's when we can really play our part, because we know that no matter the instrument, especially in the tax session, there are some folks on the opposite side that are just not going to vote for those bills because of their philosophy, and I respect that. But for us, when the Speaker and the President had monumental tax issues that needed 70 votes, and they knew that their members wouldn't support some of those things, it was important for us to not only assist in making those things happen, but also to get some monumental tax reform done for working people with enhancing the earned income tax credit. We were able to eliminate the sales tax on diapers and other feminine projects. We tried to do that 2 years ago, and I was really excited then because my little girl was still in diapers, so that would have benefited me too. But we passed it now when she's no longer in diapers. But it's not going to benefit me, but it's definitely going to benefit a lot of families, and especially those single mothers out there. Again, criminal justice reform, bipartisan. We did a lot in terms of police reform, and a lot of times those conversations are very uncomfortable conversations. But for us as a legislature, we didn't just rush. We didn't just pass things based on emotion. We met for several months with members of law enforcement, from state police to local fraternal order of police, and we heard feedback. We were educated, and we sent 18 proposals to the Louisiana legislature, and of those 18, 16 of those things became law. And that's work that we are extremely proud of, because we didn't do what we're seeing in other states. We didn't run to individual corners and not work together. As much as folks make these conversations really one-sided, we work in lockstep to get a lot of these instruments passed, and I'm extremely proud of those things. Access to voting in most states, you're hearing rolling back of voting rights. In our state, we enhanced voting rights. We extended the time to early vote in presidential elections. We extended the time that many of you have inside the voting booth. And for you all, of course, everyone in this room, we're educated voters. We go into the booth on election day and we know exactly how we're going to vote because we've researched, we looked at the PAR recommendations. You've had members of the legislature attend your meetings, so you're educated on a lot of the constitutional amendments. I will tell you, as someone that votes on those amendments, several months later, I have to study again when people ask me, what does a yes vote mean? What does a no vote mean? So I know that there are people in our state that 3 minutes was not long enough if we're going to ask folks to vote from the top of the ballot all the way down when we have 8 or 9 constitutional amendments. We felt that it was important to extend that time, and we were able to do that. Nobody came out of the regular session extremely happy, and I think that that is the way it's supposed to be. No one should go to the legislature and get everything that they want. For me, being in the minority side, I've grown accustomed to not getting everything that I want. So maybe my commentary is a bit skewed because of the side that I find myself on. But I know that the coalition that we were able to form when we elected Speaker Shake Snyder is one that has benefited us because we will see the fruits from our labor and some of the bills that we passed. And unfortunately, a lot of the successes that we were able to accomplish in the regular session were quickly overshadowed by the Speaker's decision to rush us into this historic veto override session. I've had this conversation with the governor several times. In my 10 years, that's the one thing that I haven't been able to do is override a governor. I really wanted to do it with a bill that Governor Jindal had vetoed regarding surrogacy. We were really teed up, and I wanted to go in and make that vote. And I even told Governor Edwards, I was like, look, you're my friend, but if the right bill comes up, I'm going to make the vote because, quite frankly, this is the one thing that I will probably never be able to do. Unfortunately, the bills that brought us to the legislature weren't significant enough for me to go in and make that vote. Every single Democrat, with the exception of one, returned a ballot saying we do not see the need for a veto session. And I've heard several questions. Many of the Democrats voted for those bills. Many of the Democrats were co-authors of those bills. And I think that those members who voted on those bills, I didn't vote for either one of them, but I think it is incumbent upon them to go to their districts and explain why you voted for a bill but didn't support a process that is in the Constitution to override a governor's veto. I'll tell you with the gun bill, and let me dispel this myth right now, Democrats support the Second Amendment, right? I know that there's been a lot of rhetoric around the fact that we have tried to take guns away from folks. I've never voted on a bill that would have taken a gun away from a single Louisiana resident in my 10 years. We know how the people of Louisiana feel about their Second Amendment right, and we as a party have never done that, and we have not done that. And this bill was simply not about taking away constitutional rights. I feel like this bill was about safety. I also, in addition to chairing the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus, I chair the Criminal Justice Committee. I still chair the committee. I know some folks are asking for me not to chair that committee, but today, as I stand here, I'm still the chairman. I still have my wonderful parking spot right outside the Capitol. One of the things that was largely missing was the opposition from law enforcement during the committee process. So some members that voted for those bills in the session, once law enforcement started to really educate us on how bad those bills would have been for their officers, I think that turned the scale for many of the members who had supported the bill in its original form when it passed out of the legislature. When you see sheriffs across the state state police come out and say this is something that's going to put our officers in jeopardy. When you have growing rates of violence in our communities, I think that it's important that we have just the necessary training, because I know that I want someone to understand how to use that weapon if they're going to carry it. I want, especially the folks that I represent as a criminal defense attorney, one of the most important things that happens in those trainings, taxpayers, Louisiana residents are educated on the laws. They're educated on how you can properly defend yourself, because sometimes, and I know it because I've had people walk into my law office, they don't understand just because someone is on your front lawn, you cannot go and grab your gun and unload on them. And those things are taught in the trainings that many of my colleagues tried to say were unnecessary. I think that was one of the major reasons that called law enforcement to really unify in opposition to this bill. Now, the other bill, I wouldn't tarnish the reputation of our state to support an instrument that I knew would, number one, cost us a large, possibly millions of dollars in revenue. Now, you've heard many things about the NCAA. I saw the email from the council from the NCAA. So it wasn't something that we made up. We would have definitely been in major trouble for losing that huge economic driver for our state had that bill passed. I know that we saw it in other states. We were able to get the All-Star game because of a bill, a transgender bill that was passed in North Carolina. So the facts were there. There was no need to go out and look. We would have drastically lost revenues that we desperately need. Now, if we were a state that ranks in the top 5 and not the bottom 5, that may not have been a huge motivating factor for me. But for a state that continues to find itself ranking in the bottom, I don't think it's prudent for us to throw away an opportunity to raise millions and millions of dollars, especially for a problem that does not seek to exist in Louisiana. We didn't hear from not a single coach, not a single parent, not a single athlete that had been burdened by this particular issue. And we also knew that the High School Athletic Association already has rules that basically seeks to address what this bill sought to rectify in our great state. We have traditionally held that the Louisiana High School Athletic Association, while I think we should probably have some legislative oversight, we don't. And in past issues when we've tried to regulate them, we've been quickly reminded that the LHSAA is a private entity and the legislature shouldn't get involved in those practices. For me, if we're going to open it up for one issue, I would say let's open it up and get more legislative oversight and put some members of the legislature on that body now, because I see a lot of different issues with that organization, with how they handle certain things in our community. That's not what I'm here to talk about today, but for me, it was a growing practice that we did not involve ourselves in the workings of the LHSAA. Another thing that came up with this bill, there was a large number of members of the Black Caucus that were absent that day on that bill. Many of you that follow the process, you know that sometimes those absences are strategic. On that day when we were voting for that bill, there was a huge protest on the state capitol for the family of Ronald Green. Many of you know that the Black Caucus has been very engaged in the conversations with state police and with the Ronald Green family. So I will tell you that I can speak frankly and honestly and clearly that those members that were absent, a large percentage of those members were on the steps of the Louisiana State Capitol at the time, and I don't think those members were dodging votes. But the bill was vetoed, and of course, in my opinion, I think that the speaker hastily called us into a veto session. And he stood before you and promised that he was 100% sure that the bills were going to, ultimately be overridden. I will tell you that there were times when I thought that he was right. I thought that if the bill made it to the House, that the bill will ultimately become law. and over my years in the legislature, and my former colleague, Rouge is here, we have grown accustomed to the Senate doing the majority of the work. We have consistently said, okay, let the bill get to the Senate, and they're the more mature group. They'll figure it out, right, Rob? that has been the practice, and unfortunately, that causes folks to possibly vote for a bill just to show some constituency group that they may have been supportive when they really didn't want to, because we had confidence in the Senate that they would fix the budget, that they would kill some of these bad bills. What we didn't realize is that a lot of folks that were on the House side are now in the Senate, right, Rob? And now the House can't just rely on the Senate to do the lion's share of the work. So I will be honest with you that there were times that I thought that the Speaker was right. The day that we pulled up for the veto session, and I think our Attorney General, he made it plainly clear it had nothing to do about the bill. This was all about, as he stated, putting the Democratic Party and the governor on trial. We pulled up at the Capitol in strategy meetings. They pulled up and had a pep rally. The chairman of the delegation had it wasn't even a life size, a huge elephant in the parking lot. And I think that some of those things hurt them in the long run. I think that some of the members that may have been on the fence, when they saw those types of demonstrations, they quickly learned that this was more about a show and less about actually addressing a real issue that would have impacted young people in our state. Many people have said, oh, you have a daughter. If you don't think this is important for your daughter, then at least think it's important for mine. I can go through a litany of issues that are important for not just my daughter, but all daughters across the state of Louisiana that we've ignored. And until we start not ignoring those things and take holistic and have a real appreciation and move the needle for things that are impacting women in our great state, let's not start with a bill that is not going to solve a single issue, that is not going to correct anything, and is frankly going to cost us millions and millions of dollars. And I think that I've reminded my colleagues on the other side that I stand ready to address a lot of the issues facing women in our great state. It was no surprise that, and I think that the Speaker and those on the other side, I don't know why they were so surprised that the Democrats voted the way that we did. It is known around the Capitol, and it's funny how I watch on both sides the accusations of, arm twisting and threats, promises, because I will tell you, they happen every single day, especially with something so fragile as a veto override. As a governor, if I'm a governor, I certainly don't want anyone in my party to take away my veto authority. And as a speaker, I certainly wouldn't want anyone in my party to go against me when I've made a statement that I'm 100% convinced and confident that something is going to happen. So I will tell you that, and I don't know him personally because, the governor didn't have to ask me, and the Speaker, he and I are respectful enough that he knew not to threaten me, and he wouldn't even put me in the position because we are good friends. And I will tell people that, until my term ends, Clay Shakespeare is the right person to be our Speaker. I am utterly disappointed in him now, but I know that from day one, the people that have called for him to remove me and other Democrats were not the people that wanted him to be the Speaker. And I have been quoted several times as saying that I'm confident that the Speaker is going to listen to those in his family. And I get in trouble for saying the family. I end up on certain blogs because I mentioned the word family. But that is what I think is important, because in the family, Sarah, who's my cousin, in the family, you're not always going to agree, but you're going to always be there to support that person. And I will stand on my comments, and I will tell you that the folks that elected him have been more of a family to the Speaker than some of the folks that are asking for him to get rid of all of the Democrats. And I hate that you guys and those folks out there in blog world don't want to respect that as truth, but it is. So we rallied behind to support the governor and protect his veto, and the Speaker's decision to remove 2 Democratic chairmen and 2 other members, I think was the wrong move, because not a single thing that the speaker has wanted to do has been accomplished without the supports of Democrats. His tax reform bills would not have passed. A lot of the issues regarding transportation, they would not have passed when there were those folks on his side that wanted to vote no, and he needed the Democrats. And I think that it threatens all of the good things that I mentioned that happened during the regular session, because I know that there are some hurt feelings out there, and understandably so. I know that for me, whatever the speaker decides to do with my chairmanship, I can accept it, and I will continue to move in the fashion that I've always moved. I'll have to walk a longer way from my parking spot to get in the building, but it won't remove my status as a state rep for District 101, and it's not going to silence me. And I would suggest to you that it's not going to silence Chad Brown, Vincent Pierre, or C. Travis Johnson, in that I think now they are more motivated to work towards making sure that we don't find ourselves in this situation again. And when I say this situation, this veto override session was so close, and the numbers were so close, not because of actions taken this year or actions taken last year. The votes were so close because of actions taken the last time we drew legislative maps. And we drew maps that quite frankly don't look like Louisiana. And of course you might say, oh, well, of course you're a Democrat, you're in a minority, so of course you're going to say this. But when I look at my colleagues like Tanner McGee, who represents a district that is fairly balanced, you get fair representation out of him. You get someone that is bipartisan. You get someone that's not just going to say no. You're going to get someone that says, I don't agree with this, but I agree with these 3 points. Let's try to work to see if we could get to the middle. So if we had not failed in drawing fair maps, and a lot of it is, and I've always been honest about it, some of the issues started with the caucus that I lead now, because I think that way too often we've been concerned with creating districts that are 90% African American, 90% Democratic, and what happens is when if I represented a district that was 90% Democratic, the 10% of my Republicans, I wouldn't even return their phone calls. And that's, wait, not you. I will return your phone call. But in essence, that's what happens when you create these districts that are so lopsided. You actually silence a huge part of your constituency. So, and I pick on Tanner a lot, and Tanner gets in trouble because I called him my friend, and people didn't think that he should be my friend. But Tanner is, I know that he's a good guy, but he's forced to be a good guy because of the way his district was drawn. And for us, we knew that this veto override session was not about the transgender bill, was not about the gun bill. It was about redistricting. It was about whether or not my colleagues on the other side knew that they could override a governor's veto. Right now, I believe that our caucus is more unified than we've ever been. And we didn't need this veto session for us to be unified. We didn't need to go in and successfully sustain the governor's veto for us to be unified. If you watch the Capitol, when big things happen, you see folks jump up, you see people clapping their hands, you see people high-fiving. We didn't do that. We basically, score a touchdown, and you don't need to spike and dance. You just hand the ball to the referee and keep going. And that's what we did as a caucus. And I think that after, while many folks were asking for us to be removed and making these accusations that the Black Caucus has already made a deal to wipe out the districts that are represented by rural Democrats, while those articles and those blogs were being posted, we were in the room at the Capitol strategizing with a demographer about redistricting. So for our side, we are in lockstep. And the white Democrats, the rural Democrats, and the Black Caucus, we understand that we cannot accomplish anything solely with our individual caucuses. So I don't care how many times it appears in the blog. As the chairman of the Black Caucus, I will tell you that we know and understand that we cannot be successful without our rural Democrats, and quite frankly, we can't be successful without some of the Republicans that we've been able to work with. For us in Baton Rouge, what I have really tried to stress is the importance of us looking forward to redistricting, not as a party, not as a race, but as a region. Quite frankly, we have been out-politicked by our folks down I-10 because they have learned to be real organized. They have learned to be real unified. in matters at the state capitol. We haven't done that in Baton Rouge. We take all of our local fights, be it BRIC, right, be it the Council on Aging, be it St. George versus Baton Rouge. We take all of those local fights and we bring them to the Capitol, and we're distracted from the larger picture. And right now, my conversations with Paula and Scott and Barbara are in that let's leave those matters. We could fight after the redistricting session, right? I promise you, I'll stand ready to fight with you. But for redistricting, we need to be unified as a capital region, because quite frankly, I'm tired of being out-politicked by my colleagues in New Orleans. I'm tired of seeing the majority of the projects go down to New Orleans. I'm tired of seeing the majority of our representation shifted down to New Orleans. And I love my folks in New Orleans. My district is 101. It is a former district of New Orleans. And, you know, honestly, as we look at the numbers, I know that my district lost. My district was created because of the population that was lost in New Orleans. Right now, we have a population loss in Baton Rouge because of the flood. So the irony is that, you know, your district was created because of a huge hurricane, and now you've lost population, not to the point where we think we're going to lose a seat, but we need to be, and I'm going to ask each and every one of you, I know that there are probably things that I've said today that you disagree with, and that's perfectly fine. I know that I'm probably going to vote a way that you wouldn't vote in the future, but I hope that you agree that for us as a region, we should be more focused on increasing the representation here in Baton Rouge, not just in the legislature, but in Congress. Our district shouldn't be shared with New Orleans on the Public Service Commissioner. Our district shouldn't be shared with New Orleans on the Supreme Court. I think we're rightfully due another seat that encompasses Baton Rouge, and that will be the focus of my experience or my outlook in the redistricting session. And quite frankly, that's going to be the push of the caucus, because we recognize how important it is just to maximize our representation. And I hope that you all will agree that it's important as we move forward that we at least try to do more for a region here in Baton Rouge. And that is one of the things that is really frustrating about Vincent Pierre losing his chairmanship, because of the relationship that he has with the federal government, and a lot of the work that he was already doing that now is going to be interrupted in this change of leadership. And we know that with the administration that we have now, we have so many people that have relationships with those folks, and him losing the chairmanship of such a vital committee, transportation. We're not going to get somebody from Baton Rouge to chair that committee. So now the attention that we've been able to grab from Vincent, because he's a friend of Baton Rouge, now that's going to be lost. In that, I'm telling you today that the next person that's going to chair that committee is not going to be someone that's going to be worried about making sure that we get that bridge. Now, before I open it up for questions, that infrastructure bill, I didn't vote for it. And I will tell you, as much as I want to see a new bridge in Baton Rouge, I didn't vote for it for several reasons. Number one, because I don't want a future legislature to have to do what we did in rebounding from a huge fiscal cliff. It was extremely hard to get us out of the red into the situation that we find ourselves in now. And even though I'm going to be gone, I don't want the folks coming behind me to have to go through that. The second thing is those projects, just as quick as they were added into those bills, those projects can be removed. So there's no certainty that those projects are going to remain. And then the third reason, the other two are very serious. This one is serious to me, but you might think it's kind of humorous. You know, there have been several times when myself and Rob and other members of the legislature have voted for revenue to make sure that we have vital projects here in Baton Rouge, PQ Lane. And I would get aggravated when I would see the folks that voted no outside taking pictures with their thumbs up with a sign like they actually did something to make sure that PQ Lane is a project. So I will tell you, if I'm wrong, and if we do get a bridge for that bill, I will be outside taking a picture with my thumb up, taking credit like my colleagues have done in the past. So that is my third reason for not voting for the bill, because I was tired of, you know, carrying the load while other folks went and take the picture. So at some point, Jim and those of you heard it here first, if the bridge comes, I will be out there with my thumb up, even though I voted against the bill. Thank you for your time, and I know that we have some questions. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the Ronald Green protest.
Yes.
Last week, it was reported in the Associated Press that the Louisiana State Police Colonel Lamar Davis traveled up to the day after the video was released. He traveled up to Monroe to try to convince District Attorney John Belton not to pursue
Yeah.
charges against those troopers. Do you believe it's time for Colonel Davis to resign?
I don't, not yet. And I'll tell you that I've had conversations with both the DA, the Colonel, and other members, and I've been told that that part is not true. Now, I have, some very personal feelings about this whole thing, and I'm extremely disappointed in the state police. But on that piece, I believe what I was told, that's not what happened in that meeting. And I hope that I'm not proved wrong later on.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
You brought up redistricting and that the talks have already begun around that. Are there any particular areas that your group is focusing on and hoping to kind of redraw based on how our population's really changed?
Well, I'll tell you that I think that Baton Rouge deserves another congressional district. I'll tell you that I believe that in a state with the African American population that we have, that we shouldn't just have one seat in Congress. We shouldn't just have one seat on the Supreme Court, nor the one seat on the Public Service Commission. I think that the numbers dictate that we have more districts where Democrats can at least elect a candidate of choice, and that's going to be our motivating factor.
How do you think the 6th district should be configured?
So the maps that I'm looking at, 2 different maps right now. So and I don't want to put that out there yet. But I think that the 6th congressional district should at least have the entire parish in it, and we shouldn't share with the 2nd congressional district. Yes, ma'am.
On the same subject of redistricting, obviously, in the last redistricting cycle, the Black Caucus took the position of largely packing some of the districts. It sounds like y'all are going to take a different approach this time. Is that a position on behalf of the full caucus, or is that your perspective?
No, that is the position of the entire caucus. And as I stated before, there have been so many issues. I think that those folks that made those deals to create the current maps, they didn't have to go through the battles that we've had to go through. So the members that actually represent those districts that are packed, they have been the first ones to recognize that they're going to have to lose, some population or some neighborhoods that they're used to representing. So it is a unified approach that we're taking.
I know we're waiting for the census data to come out in the next week or so, but do you feel that both Democratic or Republican districts, do you feel that there's any seats that may be in jeopardy through this?
There are some. Yeah, there are some. I mean, and there are, it's politics, right? And you cannot, you can't be in politics and then complain when things get political, right? Like for me, I'm term limited. So normally, as a term limited legislator, I can't go in and flex like most folks. I mean, I am, but traditionally, those term limited legislators have been ones that have had to be more giving because they're not going to be there. That's not going to be the approach that I'm going to take, and I think that that's why these removals are so important. Because for me, I think that it further helps us to protect the potential override if the governor decides to veto a map. Because for me, if I'm clearly showing you, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to punish you, that pushes folks to our side, right? And I think that unfortunately, what happened with the veto override session is this is all about 70. It has nothing to do with transgender. It has nothing to do with guns. It's about 70. They are no closer to 70 than they were before the session. And I think that removing those members took them a little further away from 70. Yes, Will.
Ted, you said that the speaker is the right person for the job, but you're utterly disappointed in him right now. Does that mean that the coalition that helped get Clay elected, including with a lot of impact support, is intact, even though the removal of the people from committees?
I think that we have a lot of tough conversations ahead. I have never, even though it's been reported, I'm not going to even call these reports because these blogs aren't really news outlets. We have never, as a caucus, tried to remove the speaker or even suggested it. Now, I have a litany of text messages from colleagues on the other side that have. So for us, we have not done that. And I think that, while the relationship is frayed, I don't think that it's at the point where I think that it's going to be just totally disbanded. But we do have some making up to do. Yes, ma'am. the Democrats didn't ask for the veto session, right? The speaker made the House more partisan when he made us go back there. And you know, for us, I think that not only the speaker asking us to go back, but the pep rally that ensued. Now, for me, I get charged with it as well because some folks don't like my tweets, and I'm the bad guy. But I didn't ask to go into the veto session, and for us, there was nothing that changed. Like, we have been lockstep. Every single part of this process, we were lockstep in making Clay Speaker Snyder. We were lockstep in these tax reforms. So I don't know why it was such a big shock for my colleagues on the other side that we and this had nothing to do with the governor. And again, I will say this, and I said it to him. You know, yes, of course, as a governor, you don't want your bill, your veto overridden. This was about not John Bell. This was not about Ted. This was about maps for the next 10 to 15 years. So to keep saying that we were just trying to protect the governor is absolutely false. We knew that this was a test to be able to override his decision to veto maps that weren't fair. So this had absolutely nothing to do with him and more about the maps moving forward and how districts are going to look. I am happy that Clay is finally now getting the support from the people that should have supported him day one. If they had supported him day one, we probably wouldn't have 5 Democratic chairmanships. So I'm happy that he's now invited to, you know, he's not at the kiddie table, he's at the big family table now. And hopefully they continue to be friends with him and not call him wrong way Clay and all these other things. So, because we haven't done that. I've told you, I've called him my friend, and every time I've been asked a statement about him, I remind people that he's the right person for the job.
How much sway does Gene Mills have with Republican majority?
Unfortunately, too much. I think that you know, when I have witnessed, and I have talked to members, especially in my committee. I've talked to members that have wanted to vote a certain way, but you know, when he shows up, they vote an opposite way. You know, and you know, that's part of the process, right? I heard that they wanted me removed as chairman of criminal justice, and I'm always so nice to him. So it hurt my feelings a little bit because I'm always nice to him when he comes to the committee. But you know, unfortunately, he has a lot of sway.
How do you feel about them mandating the vaccine, and what role, if any, should the state legislature have in that going forward?
You know, I think any COVID question for me is so personal. So Ted thinks that we should have a vaccine mandate. You know, Representative James knows that that's never going to happen, right? And you know, I think that if LSU football said they're going to require a vaccine, our problems are solved. Period. Our problems are solved. And we have seen, unfortunately, that this pandemic has been made so political, and that is just. It has been one of the most difficult and disappointing things, because we literally lost a colleague. I literally spent 5 days in the hospital. Other members that have not been so public spend days in the hospital, and we go back, and in this rush to go back to session when we were still under a stay-at-home order. And this is going to be may be unpopular, but I will tell you, if the death toll last year in the African American community was here, and the death toll in the white community would have been here, we would have never gone back to session, period, right? So largely that was something that still upsets me to this day, because I think that there was this ignorance in that, this is not happening in my community, so let's rush back. Because I go to different restaurants all the time, and you see all these open seats, but they don't have the staff there, because people are, and a lot of folks say, people are just at home getting unemployment. I think that that's embarrassing, that in our state that you would make more on unemployment than you would get wages. That is embarrassing to me as a state. But I know, because I frequent some of these places, and they tell we don't have the people, because people are fearful. People don't want to go and risk themselves getting sick because other folks aren't getting vaccinated. But I just know that that's not going to happen. And honestly, I don't know if we can afford it as a state. I don't know if we can afford another shutdown. Although I kind of wish the governor would just completely shut it down until football season, so we can have some normalcy. But he's not going to do that.
One more question, if anyone has one. I think we're good.
Thank you.